Hi everyone, we're on the second show of Asking the Right Questions, and we have with us Jeetu, who's our first advisor, also our in-house quantum physicist, and our Dr. Brown from one of our favorite movies, Back to the Future. I'm not going to introduce Jeetu in too much detail, and I'd like him to do that. So Jeetu, over to you before we take you through the questions we have for you today.
Thanks, Pratika. Hi, Bambi. Good to see you all again. Yeah, so by way of quick introduction, I think there's not much to say. I just recently checked out of the corporate world after spending 25 years in there, mainly in research and development and optical physics and various and communication networks. And now it's time to have a little bit more fun in life, and that includes working with you guys. And so there's nothing much more to say as far as an introduction is concerned.
Thank you, Jeetu. And we are really looking forward to actually going into the future with you. So with that, moving to the first question, Jeetu, what do you think about the statement that law is the operating system of our democracy? Is
Um,
it?
I, I think it is not just of our democracy, but of any structured human enterprise. I mean, I think if you look back at ancient civilizations, I think that the most successful ones that we remember had a very strong legal basis. I mean, you have a few examples in India, including the Arthashastra, which is actually quite expansive and like beyond the law. It goes into political science and so on. You have like the codes of Hammurabi. You can just go on and talk about that. Anytime there's been a strong legal system that underpins a civilization, it has done well, and there's a reason for that. I think that when you have a recognized set of laws or a framework for everyday interactions, for any kind of structuring of more complex aspects of society, you do need to have that foundation to be very solid. So our democracy is no exception, and so I think it's important. Absolutely agree with that statement.
And do you think that the legal services and administration of justice have a role to play in the development of a nation's economy?
Well, I think it's an extension of the previous answer, right? So legal services are the way in which one of the means by which like everyday citizens or any other person or company in the country can access the judiciary within the framework of the laws, get to understand so many different aspects of it. So, yeah, I would say that if you had less friction in that system and more ability to execute your, I mean, any kind of a contract, I guess, and just as one example, I think that would be an indicator of a well-functioning economy or a society, and so I would expect to see legal services to be quite significant as a portion of the economy. And I think this is borne out when you look at that, when you look at economies today, which are recognized as doing well or anything else. I think you would find that statement to be more or less true, as opposed to look. I mean, I'll put it this other way: if you don't have legal services that are above the ground, you're going to have something below the ground, and it's far better to keep it all in the open than not. So, hey,
So taking from that, what have you noticed about the legal services in India? Like an absolutely like honest review on what you have seen of the Indian legal services market, the judicial services here, the administration of it. Can you give us a few examples of
well, look,
where things
I
are
think
at,
this is
or what you have seen in your career this far? What have you heard?
sure. I think this is actually where it helps not to be a lawyer, because they can't disbar me from anything based on what I'm going to say. So, well, I think that while I mean, like I speak of this as completely as a layman, and I don't know the law in detail, and I've never studied it. But it seems to me that in India we have a pretty strong legal framework and a very poor means of enforcing it in everyday life. A few examples are just the sheer overloading of the court system, which basically means that to get something through the court system, there has to be a motivating factor, and whether it's power, influence, money, or something else. I mean, to push something through, or whatever it is. I mean, like I think that it's safe to say that the average citizen faces an uphill task in getting some kind of a resolution over here. When you talk about if you're talking about company to company, let's say that I'm going to be setting up an enterprise over there. I mean, like we were famous for license Raj at one point of time, where uh, I mean, you might have to, even if it was strictly above the law, you just had to go through a cumbersome process, and that opens up in turn the ability for people to move it through faster channels, not necessarily above ground, right? And that kind of thing. When probably like I mean, while the older system has been replaced by a more efficient one, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody to say that it's 100% above board, right? And so, but this is the kind of thing that actually makes a big difference in terms of confidence. It's like, can I, as a complete nobody, access the same quality of legal systems and in the country as somebody with all the means? If that statement can be shown to be true, then I would say that we live in a thriving society, and I don't think we are there yet. And I think this is where I think also that not just I mean, like this is not any kind of a statement about corruption or bribery or anything like that necessarily. It could be just about the sheer uh, slowness of the system. I mean, like the gumming up the works itself could be another aspect of this. But I think that uh, well-functioning system in which legal services are an important part, I would say probably important making sure it's available to everybody as equally as possible. So democratizing legal services as much as we can, for example. I think that's going to be quite important in the in how far we can actually attain, what heights we can attain. I mean, we will progress, but the question is, could we get further? And I think that underpinning is what really depends
Yeah.
on the legal system.
Taking from your thoughts, I strongly believe that that you're being positive when you say that we will progress and it will only improve if there is a good legal system. I am of the belief that there can be no progression if we don't have a robust legal system. And
I
by that
agree.
I mean, like, there should be really good, effective administration of justice.
I agree.
And
And I think that the fact that we are progressing itself points to the fact that we have a good framework. It's just not an efficient framework. So
yeah,
the fact, I think that what I was trying to get at is saying that how much more could we do if there was an efficient framework and not just a framework?
yeah. And this also reminds me of an experience I had during COVID, actually, where, there were these people who were selling all of us these oxygen cylinders for like really, really tiny ones for like 80 grand, a lakh and a half. And in my house, everyone went down during that Delta wave. So I had people calling me up and telling me stuff like, if you don't buy this for like a lakh 50 or a lakh, you would possibly lose your family. They would be like walking into my house and they were trying to sell me remdesivir for like a lakh of rupees, a lakh 50. Somebody was touting Medanta beds to me. And at that point in time, the cops were nowhere to be seen. Post that, because I'm a lawyer, I worked with the team to send all of these people legal notices, and we tried to file like FIRs. All of this was in the news.
Mm,
This also reported to the courts. There was such a breakdown. I mean, there's already a breakdown to quite an extent, but I mean, it was so obvious during that time. And even now, when we look back look back at it, actually, none of these people who were doing all of this during COVID were questioned. And I'm pretty sure that they continue to operate in the exact same way, just in another field.
Yeah.
And and here I am, I'm a lawyer, I am from a relatively privileged household, and we couldn't manage this whole show. And then I'm thinking about people with far lesser privileges, not so educated. I mean, how are they going to survive? Like, and another example that I'd like to share with you is that there is a girl who works at my place, and her brother was admitted to AIMS, the trauma center, and he was completely intubated. In that intubated state, because the doctors at AIMS realized that he cannot be operated, they were forcefully trying to discharge him and were telling his mom to operate the medical apparatus. Now, if you read the MCI rules and regulations that apply to doctors and administration of hospitals, etc., it clearly says that only a doctor can operate a medical apparatus. Now, so there was such a contradiction to what was happening and what is written in the law. And in this instance, we had to make a presentation, a representation to the Delhi High Court. Thankfully, in this case, we saw the light, and the judge actually passed an order forcing AIMS to keep the boy around. But there
No,
have been several
no,
such
and here's an example, right? I think that in India, what you're talking about is basically, you just described the classic problem that we have in India. Money buys buys justice in India, right?
yes,
Because unless you have the means, you do not get to operate the courts.
yeah,
You do not get to operate to access legal services, even of the most basic kind.
yeah,
um, we do not have a population which is at this point of time very well versed. And I include the educated in that. It's not. It has nothing to do with education. We just don't know enough about what rights we have, what we are entitled to access, etc. In terms of legal system. If you have money, you can make the system talk. If you
yeah,
don't, you're at the mercy of whoever you're dealing with. And there's just so much backlog of this that, I mean, like there's a saying, right? Like justice delayed is justice denied, right?
yes,
That's
that's
the
it.
case in India.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. For years, it just goes on for years,
Yeah,
and it goes on even if you're a lawyer or a judge yourself, G.
yeah,
So the system doesn't spare even a lawyer or a judge, actually.
yeah.
So it's we're all in it, actually, essentially. So what do you think could be one of the solutions to this problem? Do you think it should be? Do you think legal services should be made government services? Should there be like should lawyers be paid by the government system? How can we manage this better?
Look, I think that the judiciary is an important part of the government, and I think that making the judiciary function well could be one of the areas in which the government could focus on, rather than actually making every aspect of legal services a government function itself. I mean, this is, I mean, like if you're a pure capitalist, you probably would say let's throw everything open to the markets. But I mean, like
Yeah,
capitalism with the regulation is just anarchy, right?
yeah,
And so it's like, I would say that, like, maybe where the government has to be strong is making sure that the regulations and the judiciary are functioning as efficiently as possible, and then the legal services in this country need to be completely aligned with that. I mean, remove the load on the system, remove the friction on the system, make it accessible enough in a way that anybody could do this. Like, so we're like, I mean, anytime that somebody needs legal services, you can't be running to one of the big houses of the country. I mean, like there's four or five in Delhi which basically rule the Supreme Court, and so you can't. I mean, like I can't access those, and so how could like anybody else on the street without the means do that? And so I think that, like, I mean, like if you look at the way in which systems are adopted in other places, right? Like, so there's a certain democratizing of the basic legal services, right? Like, so if you and I have to enter a contract, it doesn't have to be something which takes days and months and years to actually execute. If it's something which is completely within the, I mean, this is just an example, right? Like, if it's something which is completely prescribed within the law, within the legal framework, and if it's easy enough to execute, like for example, I'm buying a car, you're selling a car, right? We don't go to a lawyer today in India. You have like the form 29, the form 30, you bang, you go, you give it to the RTO, and hopefully it'll get done quickly. But like, so
Yeah,
there's an example of a contract which basically
yeah,
doesn't involve, and I mean, there are legal services involved in that. It's just not through the lawyer, the lawyer route, right? And
yeah,
so that's just example of a contract. Like the thousands and thousands and thousands of cars being bought and sold in India all the. It's like if every one of those had to go through the courts, you'd be dead. I mean, the
yeah, yeah,
courts.
of course,
So
of course.
just using that as a trivial example of maybe a cartoonish example of saying
Yeah,
that when you actually take things which are essential in the legal system and then put it out in a way that anybody can access them for, and you bring the cost of accessing them down, make it transparent, make it completely within the framework, and I think you can just bring more and more of the populace within. I mean, to be able to rely on that. Now, if I don't have to go run to the RTO like 5 times to get my car sold, I can be using that to do something more productive. That's how the
absolutely.
economy will grow. I mean, you're taking away the load from the system and giving people control of accessing legal services with very little cost and time, and where they can go off and do other things with their lives.
Yeah, yeah. So actually, Jeetu, judiciary is like an independent organ of our system.
Hmm.
So essentially, at least in the face of it, the government can't do too much. The judiciary
True.
has to act on it itself. We do see some work being done, but I think it's taking very long. It needs to be done faster. Just last year, when I visited Singapore, I happened to, visit the courts there. And what some of the lawyers told me is that they had the same issue earlier in terms of the pendency of litigation, etc. But they found a way and they managed their way out of it. I think one simple solution would just be more number of judges and just more lawyers assisting judges as well in managing the caseload and
Yeah.
in writing the initial opinions, etc., very very quickly, and then the judge can review it. A lot of the arguments can be made through written submissions, and
Yeah.
instead of like a long drawn, like this is for the matters where like the written submissions could work. So actually, I'm seeing a lot of solutions. I'm just wondering why none of this is being implemented. But I'm hoping that that some of this will get done fast because this is 2024, and there is no reason that with the kind of technology advancements that we have today, with the number of lawyers that are passing out each year, and actually it's not so tough to train a lawyer, and I believe that lawyers need to start getting trained in law school itself. By the time they get out, they should be able to write like a really clear opinion. So if like the training is done right, if the teaching is done right, then we have enough of a workforce to assist the judiciary to clear up the backlog. Also, essentially an advocate, a lawyer, is someone who is an officer of the court. So there is no reason why, with such a large population of lawyers, we cannot clear up the backlog that we have. And I also feel that I think we need to have complete in camera proceedings all the time for all the courts. Of course, there could be some family matters and all which are confidential, and there the recordings can be kept off public limits. But I think everywhere else, almost actually, Bambi, they have put cameras everywhere, haven't they? Almost
Yeah,
everywhere. So I think that's like a good move, and I think slowly we will hopefully start to see improvements. And with like companies like us, I'm sure there are going to be more that are going to open up. They're going to ask the right questions, and we will see a change with this. Jeetu, the next question for you. Um, it is believed that the legal services market in India doesn't even account for 1% of the GDP. Whereas in other developed economies, it's definitely like above a 2% contribution to their GDP. What do you think? Should legal services contribute a greater share in India's GDP, and why? Because I'll just give you an example of where this question's coming from. When we lawyers look at a transaction, typically like a percent to a percent of the total transaction value is kept as like legal services cost. And now when I look at the nation and I see that not even 1% is being committed towards legal services, to my mind, something is going wrong here. So now your thoughts on this.
Look, I'm thinking along multiple directions. Like here are a few of them. 1% is probably the official legal services cost. I can access the same outcome that I get through legal services without ever making it known. I mean, that's basically how this country operates today, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's always operated. You want to include that? I'm pretty sure that your legal services will.
I don't think we will be able to include
No, you
that.
can't.
That is other market. So
But no, so but the
above the
reason
ground, we're talking about the stuff that's happening above the ground.
the reason I'm being a little frivolous about it is to say that the legal services, as a fraction of the economy, I mean, maybe it's more of an outcome than something that you can impose. But I think that it will be a significant chunk depending on whether you can measure it or not. Right. So, I'll give you an example of the U.S. Where I'm a lot. I'm quite familiar with the way in which a lot of this works. The number of lawyers, the number of different types of law firms that you have. I've been focusing on very, very small and niche areas, broad-based law firms, all of that stuff. The access to the courts at multiple levels, right? Like all the way from a town court all the way to the Supreme Court, and like just the sheer access to the legal system, right? So you just see how much of that. I mean, take away the litigious nature of the society for a second. I mean, but you see that everyday life is enabled by legal services, right? I mean, like, so the thing is that if I was to look at Indian companies and their American counterparts, the presence of lawyers in a run-of-the-mill company, which basically maybe it sells paper. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it sells like semiconductor chips. The presence of lawyers in that company, not just for IP and patent law, but for everything else to enforce contracts or like come up with like to vet the day-to-day activities of the firm when it engages both with like an external world and for its internal purposes, are huge. Now, Indian companies do not have that many lawyers. I say this from looking at how a billion-dollar company, for example, in India operates. There are not that many. I mean, I remember, like, for example, when I used to work in the US, there was an entire floor of around maybe about somewhere between 50 and 100 legal personnel, not just lawyers, but paralegals and lots of others who just dealt with patent law. Right? I'm not talking about the other aspects of this thing. Over here, I can barely think of 5 lawyers in a company that's. I mean, like it's not even a comparable scale, right? So this is anecdotal, right? So you can't take that data seriously. But what I'm trying to illustrate over here is basically the sheer gulf in the way in which you think about legal services, why they are important, what they can do in order to push your own enterprise forward, and by extension of that, the entire economy forward. So I think that when you rely on this as a means of pushing societal progress forward, it will automatically take on a higher percentage of the economy, and the economy will be higher than what it is. So not just the fraction of the pie, but the pie itself is getting bigger in so many different ways.
Absolutely.
In India, I would think that a lot of this is not to push things forward necessarily in terms of progress, but to make sure that you don't get hit. right? It's like the other way around. It's like it seems to be a very different end of the game. And I speak of this like as someone who knows nothing about the law. Um, I try to stay within it
I
as much
think,
as
yeah,
possible, but I know nothing about it.
right on point. You're right on point about this. And I think a lot of the businesses must be actually, and I mean, like, they'll probably like pull out the money when there's a dispute. And a lot of it will be used to actually like, you know, um, I don't know if I should say this, but I think I should maybe. A lot of the times, the money is being used for all the wrong reasons to sort of like pacify situations,
No,
pacify notices that are being
yeah,
received.
no, to
Pick
extend this
off
beyond the
various departments. It's just that's where the money is going, and because there's no enforcement or hardly any enforcement, uh, they are really not afraid of the rule of law. Actually, there is no rule of law per se in India.
yeah. No, and the thing is that not just from the legal domain, but for everything. And I speak of this, for example, like from my experience in R&D, from sales, from anything that you want to talk about, right? The notion that prevention is better than cure, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, all of that is completely missing in the Indian context. Right? We look at this and saying that we do not want to spend money on prevention. We'll when the time comes, हाँ देखा जाएगा, देख लेंगे कि क्या होता है, right?
Yeah,
And what we don't realize is that when you add all of it up, you spend a
yeah,
lot more than if
yeah,
you actually had the strong legal service background in the first place to prevent things from happening. And
yeah,
you are you're spending that money in a known area as opposed to shelling it out to somebody else that has
yeah,
done that is essentially getting the damages. And
yeah,
what does it do? It kills your reputation. It kills your working structure. It takes away the time. Your top brass is all sitting and focusing on the legal issues rather than actually figuring out how to drive the business forward. So many different things, right? So it's just this simple notion saying that, like, look, get these things organized and pay for it up front. You will it will pay for itself many times over in the long run.
yeah.
That concept is still a hard one to come by in India.
You're absolutely right, and we've also seen this a lot. Like, people won't comply with the laws, and then eventually they will have to pay a lot more in handling the notices they get. Then again, there is going to be still no enforcement, not like their business is going to stop running. So actually, the
Yeah,
reason that they are not complying
yeah,
is because they know that they will get by eventually.
yeah, yeah,
And because they have repeatedly, like, the startups have seen the leading businesses of the country deal with situations exactly like this, and they
see,
are
and this
guided. So many times they're guided by advisors who've been like managing large companies and have now retired and are actually guiding them in that direction.
Yeah,
That,
and what
I,
this does is it builds a society without trust, right? Like, so
yeah,
when what happens is that, I mean, like, when you adopt this attitude saying that I will spend less today, when a problem comes, it'll get tied up in the courts for 10 years, nothing, nobody can touch me anyway. By the time I'd have made my money and I'd have disappeared, right? That by extension builds a society in which, or a corporate framework or whatever business landscape where you don't have trust as the basis of everything. If you don't have trust as the basis, how's your economy going to grow? Right? I mean, like, this, you're spending way more on the friction that arises between you and I not trusting each other in a simple transaction, as opposed to both of us being able to move past that and get to better and bigger things down the road. And like, so I think we limit ourselves when we actually, as a society, when we operate on this low trust mode. And sadly, I would say that this is where it is now. The good news, the eternal optimist in me, is that I look at. I remember the 90s. You probably don't. Uh, so, and I remember the day liberalization came back. I was in college at that time,
Yeah,
and before that, it was just such a hard life in order to kind of move things forward. I mean, it's not just trust between individuals; it's just a trust of me in the system. Right now, all of that has changed dramatically, and I'm pretty sure that it's going to accelerate, and it's going to bring in more and more of society within that framework. And when that does, I think it will truly be something which will be well greased. The machine will be well oiled, and can probably do much more than we can today with the same resources.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, we should be more optimistic. I am also hoping that things will get better soon, especially with No Gray G2. So you've actually seen the story of No Gray evolve. I think we met back in 2017, and you came to me with an employment contract, and then we also discussed a little bit about this legal tech venture that me and the team had been already thinking about. And
Right.
so you have a complete idea about what we have in mind with No Gray. So, what do you think about the concept, Chief? What do you
So,
think of Gray as a concept?
I mean, I do remember those early days in the building in Gurgaon where we were whiteboarding.
Yeah,
With,
yeah,
there were free cups of coffee outside, which really helped, I think. Uh,
yeah,
so so I think that I mean, like, if I was to put one spin on no gray, I mean, this is not to define the concept itself. I think that one could say that it it's one of the first structured attempts that I have seen to bring out, let's call it, everyday legal services to the masses, right? Like, so that anybody with with very little understanding of the law, but with and like are able to understand the consequences of adopting legal services, and are able to do it at very little time and cost compared to what they would have to do otherwise. And so this would actually, like, if I can describe no gray at its core as something which is democratizing legal services in an open and transparent way, I think it's not just a need of the hour in a philosophical sense, or like in a, like when you're looking at some of the issues that we just talked about, but I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. And uh, so the core of the idea is completely solid and relevant, right? And now the way in which you and the team are talking about exploring various different product concepts is basically is meeting that to a T, in the sense that it's like we're talking about will it. You're talking about how to make sure that um, the Aam Aadmi can basically have a completely functioning will without actually getting into getting mired in the legal system, and how those wills can be completely executed. So this is just one example of the many, many different things that we've talked about as possibilities. So I think that the concept itself um, is, I mean, like, from everything that we've talked about, it is one of those things which I feel will be an important step to kind of make legal services as accessible, as friction free, and productive for society as a whole. So yeah, I mean, I'm completely like, I mean, like, the minute I heard about the concept from you all those years ago, and I thought this is absolutely the right thing to do. Not just a great thing to do, but uh, the right thing to do.
the right. Thank you, Jeetu. That means a lot coming from you. And why did you agree to become an advisor with No Gray?
Well, so the one part of the reason is what I just talked about. It's the right thing to do,
Yeah,
and so one part of the reason why I was skeptical about me being an advisor was basically that I have absolutely no idea about the law, right? And that's so. But when we talked about it, the path that became clear was, it's not. I mean, like the law is basic. The legal services are the backbone behind it, but there's so much work to be done around it, which I kind of was familiar with, and so that's one of the areas where I think that the complementary nature of what I could help with became clear, and but more importantly, I think that just the rapport, just the vibe, just the familiarity that we've had over the years, and talking about all kinds of things on the planet. I mean, I think starting from 2018, I think that we really hit it off from day one, and
Yeah.
so I think that there was a certain chemistry that was very easy, and I think it really helped. I think that making sure that you're aligned with everybody else at a very basic level, at a very philosophical level, actually makes it very easy to
Yeah.
kind of sign on and say, yeah,
Yeah.
these are absolutely the right people that I'd love to work with. Not that. I think that when you think about it, it's the right cause. It's something that I can help with. It's the right people, and hey, so why not?
Definitely. Feelings are mutual, Jeetu. And just one more thought here. I think for us, we also saw that you're a scientist, and that at some point we're going to, ask you to help us apply principles of quantum physics in actually like making no gray happen. And what do you think about that? Like, in from
Well, so let me answer this
like
philosophically, right?
we're gonna make this
So let me answer this philosophically, right? So I think that there are multiple systems of thought in the world, right? So there's the very rational left brain kind of. I think it's a left brain, but I'm not sure. Yeah, let's call it left brain. The kind of thought which is science and engineering, which is the world that I grew up in, right? There's the
happen.
there's the very creative right brain. Again, I think the right brain aspect of things, which basically is all around exploring, which interfaces very well with the other one. But then there's the whole philosophical underpinning of life, and like how to structure life, and which is the legal. I mean, like there's multiple systems of thought like that. I'm just listing three of the big ones: the artistic, the rational, the philosophical aspect of things. Now, when you want something to really come together, you need to bring all these systems of thought in the right balance together, right?
Yeah.
So it's pretty clear as to which one I can help with, and to me it's also it's really exciting to kind of observe the other ones at close quarters, uh, and just to kind of think about life in a more complete sense, right? So I think
Yeah.
that if I was to use that kind of like approach, I think that when you just bring these multiple systems of thought, there's very interesting things that happen at the margins where these things intersect. And I think that our discussions are kind of symptomatic of that. I think that we've had a lot of those kinds of things happening.
Yes, yes, and the last chat we had about the precipitating event, when that will happen. Can you like share that with some of our viewers? Your thoughts around, the precipitating event in a startup's journey. What is that about?
But okay, so I think this was actually coming out for discussion of quantum physics. And the first thing is that I'm not a quantum physicist, and I think that it was Feynman who was asked how many people understand quantum mechanics, and he said like there are three people in the quantum mechanics thing. And he I'm missing the story a little bit, but then he paused and saying, "I'm trying to think of who might be the third." and so, and so, but I mean, like the thing is that I think what we were talking about is the whole notion of quantum versus classical thinking, which is very non-intuitive, right? In classical thinking or classical mechanics, you think of cause effect, right? Like so, this happens, which leads to something else happening. Kind of, it's a very deterministic thinking. In
Yeah.
quantum mechanical principles, you have something called a superposition of states. So there's a lot of different things which are possible, right? Any of these is equally possible at any given point of time until something happens which collapses the wave functions, which is what we call them, into one outcome. And from there, an infinite number of probabilities or possibilities is open, and then it keeps collapsing one after the other, right? And so I think that we were using that analogy in thinking, saying that when you're in a startup's journey, there's a lot of possibilities that one needs to be aware of. Like if you look at a startup, right? Like what is a startup? I mean, like a startup is a business idea which is basically looking to get into adult mode where it becomes a company, right? Or at that point of time, you're dealing with all these possibilities that are happening, right? And you cannot lock yourself into this whole thing saying that by this action I'm going to be going to points A and then B and then C and then D, right?
Yeah.
There's so many other things that are happening. You could actually do that a lot once you're a company, because things are structured, right, in a
Yeah.
certain way. Over here, you need to be open to possibilities. I think what we're talking about is this precipitating events is basically saying, okay, what's going to happen, which takes us down this particular path, recognize that, and then open up your thinking over there, again, over there. So just keep these, it's more like probabilistic thinking. It's more like keeping yourself open to possibilities that come through. No, I realize that as I'm saying this, like there's a whole bunch of people who are looking at me as and wondering where they can get some of what I've been having. But I'm telling you that this is like this is not intended to be in any way scientifically serious, but it's more like this fun analogy kind of a thing, saying, okay, how does like this whole how do we actually apply this whole thinking to a different domain where we none of us really know what we're talking about. So,
But you
so
know, Jeetu, I'm convinced that we can definitely apply principles of physics in like also like launching a startup. Which is why I find the whole interaction with you very interesting, because I'm really hoping to learn more about physics and also seeing how we can apply some of those principles into, because then physics is basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it, based on an observation of nature?
yeah, it's physics is one of the ways in which we make sense of the world in a rational framework,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
yeah, so it's
So
basically you look at data, you hypothesize a mechanism for that, and you prove the mechanism, and once proven, you adopt it as a law, and then you keep moving
yeah.
and try to explain other things,
So I
right?
would really encourage you to bring like more of like the physicist thinking into helping us build No Gray, because I think that's like a sure shot way of making sure that we're able to launch
Hey,
this style in whichever direction we want to take it.
so to a
So
man with a hammer, everything sounds like a nail. So I know physics, and there you go. Like,
So then you got to just keep bringing it on into each one of our meetings and each one of our, goals. So with that, I think I want to talk to you about what do you think will be our biggest challenge in building Nokri?
so I would I would like to focus more on the internal challenges than external ones, right? Like, so when you're
Yeah,
talking about external challenges, I would basically say you normally think about things like the market and the competition and all of that stuff. Like, okay, let's put that aside for a second, because we are actually talking about very little of that nature anywhere in the world, definitely in India, right?
yeah,
So let's leave that aside for a sec. So if I was to look at it from going back to the core of no grade, right, like saying that this is the right thing to do. Now, the question is that how do you bring that kind of a scale with the right philosophy and stay true to all of that in the long run, right? I think that's not easy to accomplish, right?
yeah.
And so I think that's where the challenges are mainly. I would say that's probably going to be the biggest challenges. How do you stay true to that path?
Mm.
Everything else is everything else is addressable, but if you lose sight of that, then I don't think anything can help.
Then
To
it's not No Gray. Then we will have to change the name of the company to All Gray.
true, yeah. Oh,
And yeah,
yeah.
but
So I
uh,
And I would actually pick that to say that, okay, how, like, I mean, like, I think that the staying true to the concept, right? Like, it's going to be incredibly hard, and there's going to be a lot of things that come up along the way, which basically say, okay, how do you find the right partners? How do you find the right customers? How do you train a workforce? How do you partner with lawyers? I mean, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all what I call the tactical challenges,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there will be main strategic challenges, which basically say that how do you pick the right uh, directions to go in? But at the core of all of it, I think that this is where I see a lot of organizations struggle with, is that not forgetting who we are. I mean, I mean, like, it's easy to deal with the tactics in a relative sense. A little harder to kind of figure out the strategy, but once you actually lose that visionary thought, nothing can help you. So I think that that would be always the biggest challenge that I'd pick in any place. But it's hard to identify that with somebody that you don't know. Like, for example, if I'm looking at another company, I don't know what they're thinking about. But in this particular case, given all the conversations that we've had at a very deep level, I would say that this is going to be the hardest thing. And also, if we do the other things, if we keep our minds on it, everything else is going to be easy, right? And on a relative basis. So yeah, again, a slightly airy fairy up in the
Yeah,
clouds.
I have actually, I have taken like a very deep mental note of that because I think that's a really important point. And I often see a lot of startups, like their fabric entirely changes when things become difficult.
Yeah,
And my sincere prayer for Nogre and the whole team is that, regardless of whatever challenges we go through, we shouldn't lose the heart that we have today and the connectiveness to the vision that we have to what's really driving us.
yeah,
Um, I know it's a tough one, but I also believe that when we're surrounded by the right people, like when the core team, like everyone is like aligned with the purpose and feels about the purpose in the same way, I think then it is a relatively easier ride. So I think we've got to make sure that the core remains intact, and like the external influences are really monitored, where the money is coming from, who the money is coming from, all of that has to be looked at very, very
yeah,
carefully.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
because I've seen typically that's where the startups change based on who their investors are. It's mostly that, and it's mostly
Yeah,
your financial stresses that change the fabric of a company. So I do see that. I mean, that will also,
yeah.
like everybody else, I think it will also be a challenge for us, and we'll just be mindful
You
about
know,
this.
as they say, right, in good times, your discipline is tested because you can easily afford to not have much, but in bad times, it's your character that's tested.
Yeah,
And so I think that it's important. You're right. I mean, like, you find massive shifts uh, in the fortunes of companies, and I've seen cases in which you bring in management, you take things in a different direction, but in hard times, the hardcore DNA, whether good or bad, prevails,
yeah.
right? And you could have like the best team on the planet in a place with bad DNA, it wouldn't make it. And conversely, like when you have good DNA, right? Like I'm just saying DNA, but it's like the fundamental core of a company, right? Like and that's what really matters as an
Yeah,
individual, as an organization, anything.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so yeah, and I echo that prayer, saying that uh,
yeah,
uh, may,
yeah.
uh, may
We
may it
gotta,
always stay strong.
yeah, we gotta keep the core values intact, and so the core team has to stay close because we will walk through many situations where these things will get challenged.
Yeah,
Uh, and this brings us to the last question for this show, which is that do you think Nogre will become an impactful yet sustainable and profitable venture? What will help Nogre achieve this? I think we've already talked about that, but I'd love to hear any other thought that you have. And how can impactful people around the world contribute towards Nogre's success?
Okay, do I believe that it'll become impactful? I mean, the easy answer is yes. Because if we didn't, then what are we doing here? I mean, like, right? And, so I think that that also has to be accompanied with a little bit of humility, saying that we know that we have to be humble in adopting that stance. But yeah, absolutely, the belief is right there. Yeah, we did talk about a lot of different things that could happen, and uh, I think that when you're talking about I think the third question was when you're talking about how can impactful people help with Nokri. Like, look, I think that um, this I'm just thinking through the answer right now as we speak. See, this like the thing is that I would say that good work attracts uh, good things and good people, right? And it should also contribute in kind. I mean, like, so it's not a one-way street, right? So I think that when and again I keep referencing that North Star like a broken record, but I think that it really matters because if you're doing good work, people will come out of nowhere to participate, to help, and we need to be able to welcome that as well. I mean, like, and contribute in our own way to saying that how can we do that. I mean, like, for example, I mean, it'll be a great conversation for us to have. It's like along the way as to saying that as we are doing all of these things, what else could we help in? Maybe we go out and talk to others and saying that how can we help you in building out a better society, planet, future, whatever, right? And the causes of justice, the causes of fairness, all of that stuff extends beyond the legal system, and it relies heavily on it. And I think that when you're looking at all of this, I think that's yeah, we just take one step at a time and we keep our eyes and ears open. And I'm sure that when the core is strong, good will attract good.
Wonderful. I'm really excited about carrying on this journey with the team and you, Jeetu. And I think that's great advice, and I think that that makes a lot of sense. So that brings us to the end of this second episode. And thank you so much, Jeetu. Thank you for being here.